All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's call the meeting to order. Lacking a quorum, we can proceed in subcommittee status. We've got 5 items. They're non-fiscal, and assuming they are successful, then they'll move directly to the floor. AB 2562 Fuentes has been pulled and won't be heard today. So why don't we invite the Honorable Mr. Gilmore on AB 1728.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, AB 1728, automatic composite sampling. AB 1728 would permit publicly owned owner treatment works to use automatic composite sampling for monitoring discharge water quality. As the committee analysis states clearly, federal law does not permit composite sampling for certain contaminants in wastewater. The intent of this legislation is to give dischargers the option of using composite sampling where it isn't otherwise prohibited by law. Automatic composite sampling is extremely effective at determining contaminant levels over long periods of time. Composite sampling involves a collection of numerous water samples that are stored in a single container. The result of this method is a reading that represents the average discharge levels of a treatment plant over a specific period of time. The alternative to composite sampling is instantaneous sampling. According to operators who understand the science of testing, instantaneous sampling does not mitigate testing errors as a result of localized spikes in contaminant levels. Furthermore, instantaneous sampling captures only the performance of a treatment facility at a specific moment in time. This is particularly problematic for contaminants that require less frequent sampling. In some cases, sampling is required on a weekly, monthly, semi-annual, or even annual basis, depending on the parameters of a given facility. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that the intent of this legislation is not to put wastewater treatment plants in violation of federal regulations. I am open to amending this bill so there is an assurance that composite sampling is not used to monitor contaminants such as chlorine, ammonia, pH, and low-dissolved oxygen. I have with me today Mark Miller and Scott Jocelyn with Nevada County's Wastewater Operations Division. They can provide more detail on the scientific benefits of composite sampling for treatment work water facilities.
Thank you, committee members. Mark Miller, Director of Sanitation for Nevada County. I want to thank you for your time today. And I want to point out that we're here foremost for the ratepayers. One of our plants in particular in Nevada County, Cascade Shores, is a disadvantaged economic community of 87 homes, and they've just spent over $5 million on a wastewater treatment plant upgrade. Their annual sewer charges are $2,445 a year. The cost of sampling is a real burden for many of these homeowners, and we're here to represent those ratepayers. But more importantly, we're here as environmentalists. Both Scott and I are in the industry, and we want to protect the environment and public health. And one of the things we want to do is see better science. The testing, we're not opposed to any kind of regulation that makes scientific sense. In this case, the grab samples, meaning an instantaneous sample, is not representing the best science, and it will often give you a misinformation because it's just a point in time. A composite sampler samples time over a longer period, so you have a more true picture of what's actually going in your effluent discharge and what will ultimately affect the public health and the environment. I'd like to introduce Scott Jocelyn, who is our wastewater manager, and he's the real scientist behind our operation.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. The sampling that we're talking about, this bill, what we're hoping what it will accomplish is essentially give us the choice to use a composite sampler, which will better represent the effluent at the treatment plants. If you have any questions.
Currently, well, I'll leave the questions to the
Any other witnesses in support?
Karen Lang on behalf of the Nevada County Board of Supervisors in support. Thank you.
Okay. I guess I do have more to add. Thank you. The permitting process for wastewater treatment plants is that when the regional board opens up a permit, then it's open for everybody to analyze, and that's a big deal. It's a lot of back and forth. In this case, we have permits that have already been accepted, and they were essentially accepted such that we have GRAB requirements on most of our constituents. There are 2 locations in the approved permit where we are allowed composite samples, and I brought copies of the relevant pages of those permits for the committee to see if interested.
Okay, I think at this time we do have a quorum, so I'd like to take roll call, and then I'll ask any witnesses in opposition.
Nava. Miller.
Here.
Blakesley.
Here.
Chesbro. Davis. Fuhrer. Monty. Reskin. Smythe. You have a quorum.
Okay, any witnesses in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, members, Justin Malone on behalf of the California Coastkeepers Alliance. We regret that we need to oppose this bill. On March 29th, we did send a letter to the author in this committee. And essentially, the 2 concerns that we have. One is we believe that the sampling that would be allowed under this bill is not actually allowed under U.S. EPA regulations, and specifically the MMP, the Mandatory Minimum Penalties Program. And also, secondly, we believe that the sampling that's now done is much more transparent. And so we remain concerned, even if there was a distinction between those which are explicitly allowed and those which aren't explicitly allowed under the federal regulations. We remain concerned that the current process of sampling is more transparent and is actually more beneficial in ensuring that the sanitation districts meet their compliance requirements.
Great, thank you very much. Any other witnesses in opposition? If not, questions from members. Mr. Ruskin and Mr. Blakesley.
Mr. Gilmore, hi. So I want to ask some questions. As I understand it, you feel, and correct me if I have a misunderstanding of the bill, but as I understand it, you feel that the sampling, as it's now taken, can create an unfair estimation of the quality of your water at any given moment because of the small amount of water that is tested, because of the small size of the district. But what troubles me, though, is it's still accurate at that moment. How do you, in other words, at that moment, whereas a sampling of a sampling I would gather from any, let's say, a much more populated area would be less volatile depending on any one source. Still, the fact is that your water is impacted more than in a more highly populated area, so that one sampling, however volatile it may be, is still accurate at that moment when it's sampled, though, isn't it? And it's still the accurate reading of the quality of the water at that moment, isn't it?
Mr. Chair, Assembly Ruskin, in some respects, we believe it's more representative, even if you have a problem, because if you sample compositely, you have a chance to catch a mistake. For instance, if it's a 24-hour period, you're sampling that entire time, so if anything happens within 24 hours, you catch that mistake. If it's a one-time grab sample, you have a high percentage chance that you're going to miss whatever's out there. So the science says, just common sense, but the science will back us up that the more cumulative sample you have, the more representative of the profile of the constituents of your effluent.
But that's not the reason you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're doing it for the opposite reason, or I think you wouldn't. I mean, you're doing it because you feel that the sample is inordinately volatile. But my question is, while it's volatile, isn't it accurate, even though it's more volatile?
Yes, the effluent of a small, or even the wastewater influent of a small wastewater treatment plant, it is essentially more volatile because of the smaller community. Having said that, though, the limits that are imposed on us are the result of that sample. So if we have, say, a weekly average, but we're only told to sample once per week, and that sample is a grab, that means you're grabbing a handful of water, about 100 mLs, and you're using that to represent several million gallons of water. And if you've gotten lucky or unlucky, depending on how you want to look at it, and you happen to grab at the peak, you're found at fault on your permit when there was, it could have been a normal variation in the treatment plant. And on some of these constituents, they're not acutely toxic. If there is a blip in the plant, there's no effect on the effluent.
It is somewhat complex, and I'm not sure that as I have concerns, and I realize I need a greater understanding of this to remove my concerns.
May I just say that I'm certainly, as I said, I'm open to amending the bill to ensure that the composite sampling is not used to monitor the contaminants such as chlorine, ammonia, pH, and low dissolved oxygen. But where the federal law falls silent on this particular issue, I think that this should be an alternative that we definitely should consider. So with that'll be my closing, and I would ask for your aye vote if there's no other questions.
Yeah, Mr. Blakeslee has a question.
I'm trying to understand why the GRAB methodology would be considered superior, since the GRAB methodology could not only capture highs, it could capture lows, and in effect under-assess the contaminants that are being discharged. If you have a volatile outflow, which has a median of a certain number and a standard deviation of another number, and may have a skewed distribution which is not symmetric about the mean, which could have a wide variance in what actually is coming out of the system. If depending upon when you grab the sample, statistically, you could get radically different indications of what's happening that has no bearing on what actually is being discharged, wherever it's being discharged in the aggregate. And as I understand it, if we're shooting for 10 parts per million of nitrates as a certain level above which you have problems, or some other contaminants you're watching, to ensure that you're in the aggregate sampling in a way that you know what's actually going out, it seems that the last thing you'd want to do is use a GRAB methodology, because you have just as great a likelihood of missing contaminants that you should capture. Maybe I'm not understanding it, but it seems kind of straightforward that to the degree you can have more information, you want more information.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Blakeslee.
Mr. Chair, that may be the case. One of the challenges that we have from the Coast Keepers side is that the U.S. EPA regulations actually stipulate specific sampling techniques, and those are associated with the permits. So there's a reason why the U.S. EPA establishes these sampling techniques and attaches those to specific permits and limits. Now, if we want to, it's like changing a permit condition and the methodology for determining compliance with the permit midstream. And I'm not sure whether that's really a legitimate, even if there may be some greater statistical probability or validity in this approach. EPA specifically precludes the use of this aggregate sampling for certain activities. Our concern was, at least initially, the bill was just a broad brush, would have allowed it for all your sampling. So we retain that concern, even if you were to differentiate between those sampling techniques which are specifically excluded and those which may or may not be allowed under the EPA permit. So that's fundamentally our concern.
And if there's already law that says that you have to do a GRAB or a composite sample for something, we would have to conform with that. It's where the law is silent on, or the scientists behind the law are silent on the subject, that we'd like to have the choice to be able to use a 24-hour composite. One example would be coliforms after the disinfection process. That has to be a GRAB sample. You can't store that in a bottle. You will get artificially high numbers. And so there are cases where GRAB sampling is the only viable sampling method. But then there are also cases where a 24-hour composite is the most accurate. and then there are cases where it's simply silent, and we'd like the choice.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none. Is anyone moving this bill?
I'll move the bill.
There's a motion. Is there a second? There's a motion and a second. The chair is recommending no. Did you close?
I did. I'm respectfully requesting the honorable
Okay.
Mr. Pedro Nava for an aye vote.
Thank you very much. Call the roll.
Nava?
No.
Nava, no. Miller? Aye. Miller, aye. Blakesley? Blakesley, aye. Chesbro? No. Chesbro, no. Davis? Fuhr?
No.
Fuhr, no. Monning?
No.
Monning, no. Reskin?
No.
Reskin, no. Smythe?
Two ayes, 5 noes. Your measure does not succeed. Do you wish reconsideration?
Please.
As a courtesy, of course. Mr. Bettis here?
Thank you.
Then we'll go to you.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members.
Yeah, welcome. You want to present on, is it AB 2202?
We can start with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Last fall, AB 1079 was signed into law, requiring the California-Mexico Border Relations Council, chaired by Cal EPA Secretary Linda Adams, to develop a strategic plan to guide the implementation of the New River cleanup and deal with the residual and projected pollution in the New River. In November of last year, SBX 7-2 was signed into law, authorizing a state water infrastructure bond. In Chapter 5...
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Yes.
There's a motion and a second. That's usually a good sign. As amended.
I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Do you have any witnesses in support?
Yes, I do.
John McCall with the Calexico New River Committee. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions, members of the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
I think I know the outcome of this. I have discussed. Wrong bill. Wrong bill. Never mind.
Okay. Who was that? Saturday Night Live? Never mind.
Look at the wrong camera. See which one.
Okay. Seeing no, there's a motion and a second. Seeing no questions, comments, members of the committee, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? Miller, aye. Blakesley? Blakesley, aye. Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Davis?
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhr? Fuhr, aye. Monning?
Aye.
Monning, aye. Ruskin?
Yes.
Ruskin, aye. Smythe?
Your measure's out.
Thank
And
you.
Mr. Chesbro has already used up all of his question time for the day. If you'd like to present AB 2515, please.
Perfect. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll start all over again with a different bill here. Last year, AB 1540 by the Assembly Health Committee was signed into law, requiring the Department of Public Health to develop regulations governing water filtration treatment, also known as point of entry and point of use treatment by public water systems with up to 200 connections. However, these regulations have not yet developed, and according to the department, it could be several years before they are completed, leaving residents with limited safe alternative sources of drinking water. AB 2515 would authorize the Department of Public Health, until the regulations governing point of use and point of entry are completed, to develop criteria governing the permitted use of point of use treatment by public water systems in lieu of centralized treatment. The criteria would not be subject to the Administrative Procedure Act, allowing for a more expedited authorization of point of use, but would carry the force of law. Additionally, the department would publish the criteria on its internet website and would provide opportunity for public review and comment, to include at least one public hearing conducted upon not less than 20 days' notice. Now, why is this bill important? 2 weeks ago, I brought a bill before your committee that would facilitate the development of drinking water infrastructure for the eastern Coachella Valley, the long-term solution to address the drinking water needs of the residents in my district. However, today, also listening to the concerns of Mr. Blakesley, right, I ask for your support of AB 2515, which attempts to address the more immediate drinking water needs of our residents in the eastern Coachella Valley and throughout the state of California. whose primary drinking water source is contaminated with arsenic or other contaminants that is no longer potable, so on and so forth. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Any witnesses in support?
Martha Guzman, California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation.
Thank you. Any others?
Pete Conity, representing the Pacific Water Quality Association and the Water Quality Association. We're in strong support of this bill. It's an excellent, cost-effective way to take contaminants out of groundwater.
Thank you.
Justin Malone, on behalf of the local environmental health directors, very much in support.
Thank you.
Thank you to the author.
Mr. Chair, members, Alan Fernandez on behalf of the Riverside County Board of Supervisors in strong support of the bill.
Thank you. More in support?
Debbie Davis, Environmental Justice Coalition for Water in support.
Thank you. Any opposition? Seeing no opposition, there's a motion and a second. Mr. Ruskin has a question, Mr. Chesbro as well, and Mr. Monning.
Mr. President, I just want to thank you for a creative way of moving past the sticking point on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Ruskin.
Mr. Monning.
I just want to add my thanks as well. This is representing a constituency that often doesn't have a voice. I want to thank you for providing that voice. We can't work retrospectively to clean the water that people are drinking today, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monty.
Mr. Chesbro.
I, too, want to thank you, but I do have an ask.
Sure.
And I, by the way, in no way do I want this ask to stand in the way of moving the bill forward. So, and you expressed concerns about what I'm asking for, so I certainly understand if you feel you can't agree to it. But there is a problem in my district concerning the Lock Haven Water District in Sonoma County, where this very, very small district has water contaminated with arsenic as well. And while existing law allows point-of-use water treatment systems, it only allows them for 3 years. And the Lock Haven Water District is looking to make them available on an ongoing or permanent basis. And although our districts span both ends of the state, I do think there's enough overlap that it would be feasible to combine it into your bill. So I'm making the request on behalf of that district. I certainly respect strategically you have to decide based on what's best for your bill.
Sure, I can appreciate your point. What we did with this bill, initially it was specifically for the Eastern Coachella Valley, but also hearing the concerns of many of our legislators and knowing that this issue is not only the Eastern Coachella Valley, we did expand it to the state of California. And so we are covering your district through that means. But I think what you're asking for is an indefinite solution, or allow this to continue over the course of time. That would alter the bill and would hurt the bill. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that we need to achieve the golden standard, which is a centralized system. And my hope that in this case, Mr. Chesbro, you would understand that as well.
Well, thank you for your consideration. And like I said, I'm not trying to push a hostile amendment on you. I just thought I'd make the ask. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do any Republicans wish to heap praise on Mr. Pedersen?
I'm all in here. I want to thank the author for his sensitivity to the issues and concerns that were raised in terms of trying to make sure we represent our constituents, but also the broader constituents of the state, and finding ways for us to look at these issues strategically. And I think this is a great bill that exemplifies the broader vision that this author has, and I appreciate it. Thank you,
sir.
Thank you. No further questions or comments. Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? Miller, aye. Blakesley? Aye. Blakesley, aye. Chesbro? Aye. Chesbro, aye. Davis?
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Aye. Fuhrer, aye. Monty? Aye. Monty, aye. Ruskin? Ruskin, aye. Smythe?
Your bill's out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I understand Mr. Ruskin is going to present AB 1930 on behalf of Mr. Delatorre. Okay.
Did you bring cameras?
You want to run for Attorney General? Welcome. This is Assembly Bill 1930.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Presenting this bill on behalf of its author, Assemblymember Delatorre. I'd like to begin by accepting the committee's amendments outlined in the analysis. On behalf of the author, I accept those amendments. AB 1930 sets a standard for the manufacturing and sale of industrial glass beads that contain high levels of arsenic and lead. These glass beads are made from recycled flat glass and are used in reflective highway markings, for cleaning metal parts, cleaning sides of pools, and other purposes. All U.S. manufactured glass beads already meet the standard established by this bill. However, some emerging countries, including China, produce glass beads with high levels of arsenic and lead. What's interesting to note is that while it is illegal to use these toxic beads in China, these beads are imported for use in California and other states. The beads are pulverized when they're blown out of an air compressor to treat metals or for other purposes. The resulting dust is inhaled by employees or blown into the air, potentially contaminating soil and or water. Without a standard, these beads can continue to be sold in California to businesses completely unaware of the danger. To protect businesses, individuals, and the environment, this bill will establish in our state the standard used by the U.S. military. That standard prevents the manufacture and sale of glass beads containing an excess of 75 parts per million arsenic and 100 parts per million lead by weight, and requires the packages containing glass beads to include a label indicating the beads meet the California standard. The bill ensures that California businesses do not use toxic glass beads produced in other countries and sold here. I respectfully request your aye vote.
There's been a motion. There's been a second. Do you have witnesses in support?
Yes. My name is Roger Anderson. I'm with Potter's Industry, and we're sponsors of this bill. We appreciate the good concerns that we've found in this committee with this area. We have been working for a number of years on the highway beads side of business to bring this to attention, and California has set a standard in 2008. What we're finding now is in this market segment, the emerging nations are moving those beads from highway use to metal finishing use. And so, you know, it's... We need to do something here because in China, as Mr. Ruskin said, China has a law against using heavy metals in their glass beads. So we're in an odd situation where we have an emerging nation actually sending their toxic wastes over here for us. One of the things I want to show you, the diversity in metal finishing goes for anywhere from cleaning your pool to this is actually a joint that's used, a hip joint that's used in human beings. And the finish you see on the bottom here with the kind of the satin finish is put on with glass beads, which allows the human tissue to grab onto something so it doesn't come out. So these things are used for that, all the way up to aircraft parts, to cleaning engine blocks, to remanufacturing starters, to cleaning your pools. And we think this legislation will protect those workers from overexposure to things they shouldn't be exposed to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's hope you get that part back to the person who needs it.
Yes, sir.
Any questions or comments, members of the committee? Would you like to close?
Ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, call the roll as amended.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? Aye. Miller, aye. Blakesley? Blakesley, aye. Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Davis?
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Monty?
Aye.
Monty, aye. Ruskin?
Aye.
Ruskin, aye. Smythe?
Your bill is out.
Thank
you. Next, we can hear from Mr. Monning, H.R. 23. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. I'm before you today to present House Resolution 23, which is legislation regarding the disclosure of inert ingredients in pesticides. Specifically, H.R. 23 urges the governor to protect public health and the environment by requesting the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to move quickly on its proposed plan they announced last year to require the disclosure of inert ingredients in pesticides. Federal and state law currently require pesticide manufacturers to disclose the ingredients of industrial chemicals only if they are classified as active ingredients. However, more than 99% of the ingredients in certain pesticides are designated as inert, so they are never disclosed to the public. According to the U.S. EPA, Many consumers have a misleading impression of the term inert ingredient, believing it to be water or other harmless ingredients, when in fact the ingredient may have biological activity of its own, be toxic to humans, and be chemically active. This issue is particularly important to me since two of the counties I represent, Monterey and Santa Cruz, were affected by the aerial pesticide eradication efforts to treat the light brown apple moth in July of 2009. The failure to disclose the inert ingredients used in the pesticides sprayed has left lingering concern about health implications, confusion, and suspicion on the part of my constituents. This should never happen again. As I close, I also want to point out that language is included in the resolution to exclude any information, quote, absent a finding that disclosure of a particular ingredient will cause competitive harm, close quote, for proprietary protection. I'd like to turn now to our first witness, Mr. Paul Towers of the State Director of Pesticide Watch, and he will introduce a second witness with your permission, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks, Mr. Monning. H.R. 23 supports a proposal by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to increase disclosures about what are called, quote, inert ingredients in pesticides. Currently, these ingredients, which often make up most of a pesticide, are not identified on pesticide labels. By federal law, U.S. EPA determines what goes on pesticide labels. California cannot act on its own, but we can support this U.S. EPA process. As a bit of history, inert ingredients first gained public attention in the late 1980s. Physicians who were treating patients who tragically used a common pesticide as a suicide agent reported that it was the inert ingredients that caused the illness and death. Hardly inert. In the decades since then, more and more research has supported the need to make pesticide labels as complete as possible for toothpaste and for Tylenol. I'd like to also remind you that the American Medical Association passed a resolution about pesticides in 1994, included the very important recommendation, quote, support all efforts to list inert ingredients on pesticide container labels, end quote. I'd like to actually defer the rest of the time to Sharon Caldwell here, representing the Association of Flight Attendants, AFL-CIO.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. My name is Sharon Benjamin Caldwell. I'm here both as a member and as a representative of the Association of Flight Attendants, a labor union that represents about 55,000 flight attendants employed at 20 airlines in the United States. I would like to first thank Assembly Member Bill Monning for showing his unambiguous support for the federal government to require manufacturers of pesticide products to disclose any and all inert ingredients. I'm here because many of our flight attendant members are exposed to pesticide products in the passenger cabin, which of course is our workplace. Pesticides are applied in the cabin for three key reasons: to control domestic bugs, to respond to the complaints of bugs on an aircraft, and to comply with the quarantine regulations of almost 50 countries. Flight attendants are not covered by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration regulations, and although the Federal Aviation Administration assumed jurisdiction over flight attendant workplaces, and health in 1975, it has not issued any regulations to controlled workplace exposure to pesticides. Airlines do not inform passengers nor crews prior to a flight either that the aircraft they are boarding was sprayed with pesticides or that it will be sprayed with pesticides in flight. Further, airlines need not demonstrate to any agency that when they spray the cabin, pesticide exposure is minimized. As such, many of our members have reported pesticides product-related illnesses. In Sydney, Australia, if the aircraft is designated for spraying, both passengers and crews are required to remain on board while the spraying is conducted. Neither passengers nor crews are allowed to disembark until the local officials are satisfied that the cabin spraying has saturated the aircraft cabins. The only information that flight attendants may have access to is the material safety data sheet for a given pesticide product, assuming they even know that the cabin has been treated. And yet the current MSDS provides little information on the chemical contents of these sprays. So as you can see, it is very important that the labels and the MSD for pesticide products contain complete and detailed information on all of the chemical contents, not just the active pesticide ingredients. That way, flight attendants who are exposed to a particular product and develop symptoms may provide complete chemical exposure information to their physicians. Full disclosure will provide useful information to exposed crew members, passengers, and their treating physicians. Such disclosure may also motivate airlines to minimize exposure where possible and use less toxic alternatives. On behalf of our members exposed to pesticides products at work, AFA sincerely thanks you for the opportunity to come in on these hearings.
Thank you very much. There's a motion.
I'll second, but may I comment on the witness's testimony? I'd just like to thank you because while certainly as flight attendants you spend a lot more time in an airplane than all the rest of us do, I'd say to the extent you're protecting yourselves, you're also protecting the people you serve. So we do appreciate that. At least I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional testimony in support? Any opposition? Seeing none. There's been a motion, there's been a second. Question or comments, members of the committee? Seeing none. Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Nava?
Aye.
Nava, aye. Miller? No. Miller, no. Blakesley?
Yes.
Blakesley, aye. Chesbro? Aye. Chesbro, aye. Davis?
Aye.
Davis, aye. Fuhrer? Monty?
Aye.
Monty, aye. Reskin? Aye. Reskin, aye. Smythe? No. Smythe, no.
Your bill is out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Members.
Thanks.
Now, I'm not yet ready to adjourn.
Where's your home base?
Perhaps if the Secretary prefer to call the roll for those members that were missing on the bills. Yes, starting with item 1, we're going to go through the bills so that those that weren't here can add on.
Absent members?
Absent members.
Absent members, item 1, AB 1728. Smythe? Aye. Smythe, aye.
Vote change?
Vote change
I'm not voting.
on item 1.
Yes.
Blakesley, not voting. Item 2, 1930. Dilatory. Absent member. Fuhrer? Smythe? Aye. Smythe, aye. Item 3, AB 2202. V. Manuel Perez. Smythe? Aye. Smythe, aye. Item 4, AB 2515, V. Manuel Perez. Mr. Smythe? Aye. Smythe, aye. Way off here. Item 6, HR 23, Fuhrer. He's not here yet.
Yeah. All right, so we've concluded our business. I'm going to keep the roll open to allow Mr. Fuhrer an opportunity to return so that he can add on his votes. I want to thank the committee members for their assistance, cooperation, and discussion on the matters. Thank you.